welcome to another edition of Starting Lineup. As you can see, just 3 of us here today on set. A little bit lonely. You probably miss Jason Seguini. I sure don't. You'll get everything you need from me in this episode, the preview for round 25. Remember, 9 games this week, 1 bye week. The Portland Timbers, a team I know a lot of fantasy owners out there rely on for points. They are off this week, but you got to remember in round 27, they'll be one of 4 teams to have a double week. So don't drop those guys just yet. Plan ahead. Make sure you're ready for that. Also consider 7 MLS teams in action in midweek action. Those guys, plenty of guys playing 90 minutes. You guys like Mike Magee, Aurelian Colin, even Marco DeVio, all things you want to keep in mind as you build your 11 for the week ahead. When you're doing so, you may end up using that wild card. We've harped on this for a few weeks now. That time is running out to use your second wild card. If you're a little bit nervous, you don't have to do it this week. It could come as late as next week. August 17th is the deadline. But with that in mind, here are 4 guys to start the show that are under the radar picks, but may help you differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack. Starting in Philadelphia, Shannon Williams. We've harped on him on this show. He's been a guy we've recommended to you. I guess that's fallen on deaf ears. Less than 7% of owners have him in their teams, and he's 8th overall in defender points. That's absolutely criminal. I expect that number to rise here in the next few days. Number 2, out in Salt Lake, Ned Grabavoy at $7.2 million. Another guy with scant ownership, less than 3% have him on their team, and I get it. Look, it's not a sexy pick. Ned Grabavoy doesn't exactly jump off the page, but he plays for an RSL side that's getting it done. He's got that double week coming up in round 27, and every once in a while, he pours in some goals. 5 in his last 11 games. He's a guy that if you're looking to make up ground, you want to take a look at. Number 2 in the midfield here, Jonny Steele. Speaking of guys that don't exactly wow you with their technical ability, Jonny Steele, he's been a guy that's been productive, and it's mainly because the spotlight's not on him. Thierry Henry, guys like Fabian Espindola, they're the ones that teams focus on, and then all of a sudden, Johnny pops up at the back post and could get your team some serious fantasy points. And then finally, up top in Kansas City, Soony Saad, another guy to take a look at, less than 2% ownership. He is going to be the man for the foreseeable future on Sporting KC's left flank. They want him to cut in on that right foot, and he has one of the best shots in MLS at this point. The goals are trickling in. I think there's more to come. Get on that train if you need some under the radar points. With that, let's move on to fan questions, and we'll start out with Cameron Evans. Do you guys think Deuce, Clint Dempsey of course, will make an appearance in Toronto? Look, Cameron, I think that's a guarantee. They're not going to keep him off the field in this one. He's been in preseason. He's got a few under his belt. Returned to training on Wednesday despite that virus. It's like a toy. You can't just put it back in the cupboard. The kids want to play. Those Seattle Sounders fans, they want him on the field, and I think Sigi Schmidt will reward them. I don't think he will start, however, so probably not a guy to put in your 11. Moving on, Zach Steinberg says, who's a better captain, Clint Dempsey, Obafemi Martins, or Mike Magee? Well, strike Clint Dempsey off that list. As I just explained, very, very doubtful that he'll be in that starting 11. And then between Obafemi Martins and Mike Magee, I think it's about consistency. Mike Magee has been the absolute picture of it over the last 10 weeks. Every single week, a 7 or 8, except for one outlier when he got 4 points. He's certainly the safe bet. Obafemi Martins, on the other hand, I think he's the more explosive of the two. He's the one more likely to perhaps give you that 13-point outburst, something like that. And with Toronto FC on the docket, he is probably the player that I would go with in this situation. Next up, Olaf of Norway 99, quite a Twitter handle there. He wants to know whether or not I would recommend Robbie Keane. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't recommend against Robbie Keane, but at this point in the season, I don't think he's a guy that you want to go spend $10.5 million on and waste one of your transfers. He either blows up or it's not really much production from Robbie. We've seen him have huge weeks, 15, 16-point outlays, but there have been too many zeros, too many 1s and 2s scattered throughout for me to recommend him at this time. I think you wait for that hip flexor strain, see what happens with him this week, see how healthy he really is, and then perhaps down the line, he's a guy to pick up if you haven't already used your wild card. Next up, Kristen Dyke. What do you think of Letou versus picking up some of Seattle midfields, perhaps Brad Evans? This goes back to consistency. Letou has been one of the most consistent players in MLS Fantasy over the past few months or so, a guy that you see on just about every top team at the top of those standings. Now, everybody else has him. So as we said, if you pick him up, maybe you're boosting your points, but you're not differentiating yourself from the pack. In that case, Brad Evans could be a good bet for you. Going to play up front ahead of Ozzie Alonso in that Seattle Sounders midfield. And let's just say he's probably not the guy defenses are going to be keying on. As I said, Obafemi Martins, the striker up there, Eddie Johnson, maybe even Mauro Rosales, perhaps even Clint Dempsey. Maybe Evans ghosts in there on a secondary run, gets you a goal, perhaps an assist. If you need to make up room, Evans is probably your man. If you're trying to hold on to your spot in the top in the status quo, you probably want to go with Latu. And last but certainly not least, Derek Pross has a little bit of a conundrum on his hands. He wants to know which two forwards should he play, Marco Di Vaio, Camilo Sanveso, or Diego Fagundes, or play all three and bench Jared Jeffrey for DC against Philadelphia. Well, my advice to you, Derek, is play those three forwards. I think the reward there is much higher than with Jared Jeffrey. Marco Di Vaio, as we discussed before, potentially a guy that could be up in the air based on his 90-minute performance in CCL play in midweek. I still think he'll play. Montreal need to make up some ground in the league, need to have that goal scorer up top. And then on the Jared Jeffrey side, look, I know a lot of you might be enamored with his 8-point performance against Montreal, but you just have 2 games to draw on, and you probably have Luis Silva out with that concussion. He's one that I would avoid putting in the starting lineup, but certainly a great candidate to come off the bench for you in case Di Vaio does not start. Well, that's all we have this week here for round 25 on the starting lineup. Of course, I am Andrew Wiebe. This is Mini Jason Segini. We'll both be back next Thursday to give your advice. And you can always ask your questions to @MLS Fantasy on Twitter. Until next Thursday, have a good weekend.